Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, everyone. May peace be upon you all. Thank you for coming and welcome to the Ahmadiyya Muslim Student Association's first event of the year, Why I Became a Muslim, My Journey to Islam. Now we have two guest speakers tonight, and before I introduce them, I'd like to say a few words about the Ahmadiyya Muslim community and the topic at hand. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community is a fast-growing international revival movement within Islam. By the grace of God, it is the single largest Muslim community in the world, with tens of millions of adherents united both in belief and practice, under the hand of a single Khalifa, a single spiritual leader. The community was founded by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, may peace be upon him, whom Ahmadiyya Muslims take to be the promised Messiah and divine reformer that is awaited by Islam, and in fact all major religions. He claimed that he was commissioned to bring Muslims back to true original teaching that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, may peace be upon him, taught, to spread the peace and tolerance that true Islam teaches, and to reconnect man with a living God, who hears as he always did and speaks as he has always done. The motto of the community is love for all, hatred for none. Now, our topic at hand is why I became Muslim. Now, it is estimated that around 5,200 people a year convert to Islam in the UK. So this event really aims to answer any questions people may have as to why people are converting to Islam, and it's a unique opportunity for people in the audience to speak to a few British converts about why they chose Islam and what life is like in the UK as a convert. Our first speaker is Jonathan Butterworth. Jonathan is a co-founder and director of Just Fair, which is an economic, social and cultural rights movement. He has a passion for social justice and solidarity and human rights. Before I invite him, I would also like to introduce our second speaker, Andreas, who is currently working as an academic researcher in solar fuels chemistry at Imperial College London. He has been a Muslim for just over 7 years now, and he is of Greek Cypriot background and was of Christian Orthodox religion before his conversion. So, Jonathan, take yours.
It's okay if I come up here.
Yeah.
In the name of God, the gracious and merciful, may the peace and blessings of Almighty God be upon you. So today I've been asked, and I'm really honoured to come here to speak to you about why I came to Islam. I'd like to start, if I may, with a brief recitation of the Holy Quran, which is not this verse, but I will, if Andreas would permit me, then could I turn to Surah Al-Fatiha? Okay. Okay. So I'll recite it in Arabic and then I'll recite it in English, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. The translation of this verse, and this is the first verse of the Holy Quran. The translation is, in the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful. All praise belongs to Allah, Lord of all the worlds, the gracious, the merciful. master of the day of judgment. Thee alone do we worship, and thee alone do we implore for help. Guide us in the straight path, the path of those on whom thou hast bestowed thy blessings, those who have not incurred thy displeasure, and those who have not gone astray. So I thought that, so for everybody who's Muslim, you will have prayed this before and you will have heard this before, but some people might not have heard it before. So this is the main prayer within Islam, the Surah Al-Fatiha. It's also known as the opening, and it's also known as the, it's said that within these 7 verses contains the entire meaning of the Holy Quran. So within this you can understand Islam almost entirely. And we could do a full lecture on this, but this is just the first verse and the first ayah here. So, in relation to Islam, why I came to Islam, then there's maybe 6 different steps which I've thought about. I've been asked to speak here tonight, so I thought I'd break it down into 6 different steps. There's my sort of British upbringing, which is where I'm from and what made me who I was as I was growing up in my culture. Secondly, there was a period of time within which I was Buddhist, and I investigated Buddhism and I learned a lot from Buddhism and benefited a lot from it. But then after that, I decided to investigate a little bit more about the existence of God, and I came to believe in the existence of God or Allah. And then after this, I looked at the world's religions and I came to believe in Islam. And then after this, then fifthly, there is this thing that's been mentioned, which is Islam al-Madid, which is Islam. Essentially, it's pure just Islam, but it has a very important context, or places Islam within a very important context, which I think we need to talk about. And then the final thing, which sounds a bit amusing, but I think it's important to mention as well, which is lessons of the heart, which is, I think, to some extent, faith and coming to Islam and learning in this world. There's a lot to do with, partly to do with your mind, but it's a lot to do with your heart as well. And I think you can learn a lot from your heart, so I think it's worth mentioning that as well. So, in terms of my upbringing, just to check some, how long do I have roughly would you like me to? 50 minutes, 20 minutes?
That's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Okay. As long as the audience don't get bored.
Yes. I'm tempted, and it depends on what you guys, what sort of response I get. I'm tempted to find out what is of most interest to people and then talk around that issue. But we can't do it completely democratically. But if anybody has a massive burning interest that they're most interested in, then I could focus on that. If not, I'll just run through all 6. All 6. Yeah, don't miss any. Okay. So, you guys, you live in Britain, you know about Britain. Britain's a very nice place. It's got lots of good things, but it's also got some bad things. And I think you can learn from the good and you can learn from the bad. I think what British people do very well are they're very good friends. You can have a very good friend in a British person. They're quite reliable, they're quite trustworthy, well, they're very trustworthy, very loyal. They have very good manners. They queue for buses, they queue for trains. They hold doors open and they give you space. And they don't interfere with your religion, but they won't necessarily care about your religion either. So there's the good and the bad. But then there's more bad, and I guess in this university you'll see this all the time. There's good things in friendship and in social life, but there can be negative things if it's taken too far. And this I experienced. I think everybody going to university who is of a British background, many people experience it, which is a certain approach to socialising, which means going out partying a lot, nightclubbing a lot of alcohol, a lot of looking to learn about life and experiencing life within university. So, as a British guy growing up, then all of my friends engaged in this sort of lifestyle, and I watched it, and I observed it, and I was absorbed within it. And I think that this is where Lessons of the Heart started to kind of speak to me, where I got this kind of nagging voice that kept on saying to myself, you know, who are you? And is this really who you are? Do you feel dignified in this nightclub? Do you feel dignified doing some of the things that people do in nightclubs? Do you feel dignified as a person when you wake up the morning after? Or do you in fact feel completely contrary to your own human nature? Do you feel like you've gone against your own identity and your own self? So for a number of years there was this sort of nagging voice which was sort of saying, be true to yourself, don't lie to yourself, don't be something you're not for the sake of other people, but work out who you really are and be true to yourself. So it was just kind of a nagging voice that was telling me this. But you don't really know what to do with it, because in Britain there's not a great amount of moral guidance. So I looked at Hollywood, tried to work out what it was to be a man according to Hollywood. That didn't help very much, that caused you a lot of trouble. You can look towards sports. You can look, and this is where a lot of young guys look. They look at sports players and try to work that out. Most of the people involved in sport either get arrested or end up in rehabilitation very soon, so that's not good to look either. You can try looking at the church, but as we all know, sadly the church is declining rapidly, and it's even predicted that within 10 years Islam will be the majority religion within the UK. So the church wasn't a good option for me either. As much as I kind of, I respected the church and I thought it was a good thing to look at, but it didn't seem to have much moral guidance. So I was basically without moral guidance up until about the age of 22. But then I started saying, well, there's got to be something more than this. I work 9 o'clock in the morning and I come home at 5 o'clock at night. And I work from 9 o'clock in the morning and I come home at 5 o'clock at night. I do the same thing again and again. And there was just this nagging voice which said, is there anything else to life other than just this very mundane existence? And so I continued to just think and reflect and ponder upon life and the existence of life and what the meaning of life was, what the purpose of life was, or whether there even was a purpose of life. Maybe it's just blind chance that I have these hands and that this skin is formed perfectly around my bones, and then the nails upon my fingers, and then the fact that my eye can see you guys and your ears can perfectly hear all the sound coming from my mouth. And I used to think about this, and I used to think, what's going on? And I think these are kind of the lessons of the heart, which we all feel all the time, and they're questions which are meant to be asked, and they shouldn't be ignored. But I carried on, and I didn't really reform myself. I didn't really learn to be a better person, and I just carried on, living the life I was living. And up until a breaking point where I said, you're lying to yourself and you're not really being true to who you are. So I said, okay, I've got to change somehow. I've got to be a better guy. What can I do? So for most British people and most people in the West, then the best spirituality to come to is Buddhism. It's very approachable. Apparently there's no rules. Apparently there's no God within Buddhism, apparently. And so it's very nice. It's all about peace. There's a very strong emphasis on meditation. So I came to Buddhism, and I guess I had 2 questions which I wanted to ask myself. I wanted to know, how can I be a better and more compassionate person? And I also wanted to lose my ego. I wanted to stop being a selfish person. There was just this voice which was like, you've got to stop being so egotistical, you've got to just lose your ego somehow. No matter what you do, you've just got to lose your ego. But I didn't know how at all. So I started listening to the Dalai Lama, and there were these audiobooks which the Dalai Lama does, which are all about peace and meditation and how you can be a better person. And these were wonderful, and they can teach us all so much, and I recommend them to everybody, to be honest. I think that to be a real Muslim, you need to know Buddhism. To be a real Muslim, you need to know the teachings of Jesus, you need to know the teachings of Moses, the teachings of Abraham. And it's the same with the Holy Prophet, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, that wisdom is the lost property of the believers. So I'm very happy now as a Muslim, because I feel like Buddhism is a very strong source of knowledge and of spiritual guidance for me. So I can look back in my past and say there was no mistakes, it was all correct. So I came to Buddhism. I went to India, kind of by chance, but partly wanted to look at some Tibetan Buddhism within India. And a lot of people know India kind of sits on the borderline of Tibet like this. The Dalai Lama fled from Tibet maybe in the 60s or the 40s when China started doing certain things in Tibet, and so he came to India, and he lives now in a place called Dharamshala, which is the north of India. And he was doing a tour of Buddhist monasteries, and he opened a Buddhist monastery, and me and my brother just happened to be there, and I was meditating a lot, and I had Buddhist prayer beads, and I was like, great, this is really, really exciting. So we listened, and it was wonderful, and I took so much from it, and it was a very, very, very powerful thing. But then, a couple of days later, we went up to this little village, which is the highest village in the world, with running water and electricity. And I thought, this has got to be the most spiritual place in the entire world. And I've got to come to the most powerful spirituality, definitely here with all these mountains, all these mountain peaks, nobody to bother me, no Londoners getting in the way on the tube. It's going to be the most spiritual experience ever. And my brother went away to speak to his wife. He travelled like half a day to the local village speaking to his wife on the phone. And I was there in this little monastery by myself, and I was like, right, I'm set to reach enlightenment and nirvana. But then actually I found that I was less spiritual than I'd ever been. And I felt like I'd actually completely misunderstood the whole concept of spirituality. I started to think that, you know, am I going to find spirituality by myself on top of a mountain, thousands of miles away from civilization? And it just didn't seem right. It seemed in some way like I misunderstood spirituality. So I had to keep on looking. And I thought, okay, there's something else. What else do I need? I've got somewhere. I'm more compassionate. I started meditating. I felt more peaceful. I was more in control of my thoughts. I could be a better person. People said to me, you're a much better guy now. You don't get angry. You don't shout so much. You know, you're a nice person now. But inside, I was very, there was these nagging things that were like, you know, you're still not right. You're still not, you know, there by any means. You've got places to go. So what I ended up doing actually was I ended up going back to my old ways. I ended up, you know, seeing my old friends again, going out partying, doing these things, and that was very useful because you can only sometimes know light when you know dark. You can only really truly appreciate goodness if you've known sadness or if you've known loss in some way. So this was a very valuable experience. It was kind of like a catapult. I went into it, but then I came back more powerfully out the other end, and I said, right, now, definitely, there's something else. I've learned from Buddhism, I've learned from Western secularism or atheism, and there's got to be something else. So at this point, I went back up to my house in Cambridge, and Sam, how long was that? 10 minutes?
No one's bored, right?
Okay, good. And Andreas, you can tell me to shut up whenever you want. So I went up to my house in Cambridge, and I was like, right, okay, I'm leaving that behind, because I know for sure that there is no goodness in what it is to be a man in Britain. I didn't feel like the role models I was being offered were good. So I went out into this field outside my house, and I took my dog, and he's been a steadfast companion in my spirituality. He's really enjoyed me coming to spirituality because he gets much better walks. He likes meditation because he just runs around the field all the time. So I took him with me, and he was going out down the lake, down there. But I was feeling very, very a mixture of things. I looked up at the sky, was the first thing, and there was this massive full moon, and there was, even though you might not imagine you can see it, but there was the place that you saw stars from horizon to horizon, complete pasting of stars over the sky. And there was a feeling like I'd never seen the universe before. It was as if I'd never even bothered to look. And I looked and I thought, this looks like, it's just like the best blockbuster film that's ever existed, but nobody even bothers to look at it. I've spent all my time going to the cinema, but I haven't even looked at the sky. And it was just phenomenal, and I had some other stuff I needed to pray about, I needed to ask questions about. So I just without thinking, I just went down on my knees and then prayed. And I prayed, I need guidance. I need to know what I've got to do in my life. I need to know what I need to do, who I've got to be, what my purpose is, and what on earth is going on. You know, what is all of this which I can see but which I can't understand at all, and what's my relationship with all of this stuff up here, and who am I inside as well. And so when I did this, then a very strange thing happened to me, where I had this feeling of kind of like electricity or energy passing all over my body. So it felt like I had goosebumps, but just like an electric sort of heat from these goosebumps. And I also felt very, very deeply emotionally moved. So it was a very, very emotional experience. And it was very, very strange. And I got complete certainty and complete clarity on what I needed to do. I knew I needed to set up this NGO, Just Fair, which is what I do today, and that's how I was introduced. I work for human rights human rights NGO. We work to protect human rights in the UK. So I got the complete answer to that prayer. And the other prayer which I asked was, you know, who am I and what am I doing here? And I didn't understand anything at all when I stood up. I was very confused. I kind of shook myself off and then walked home. But then when I sat down on the table and I said, what was that? Then I had this the strongest amount of faith and belief that I've ever had, much more than I have now, sadly. And that's my goal, is to come back to that peak. But there was this voice which said that this is your Lord, or that this is your Lord. And I had complete certainty that I'd just come into contact with my God for the first time in my life. And I remember this very strange feeling, which is, say if it was sunny now, and if you hit one of these chairs, then you'd see loads of dust rise up from the chairs. You know that sort of thing, when you see dust in sun rays. You know what I mean? And it's just very tiny, small bits of dust, and they're all floating around. Then I felt like that, like absolute tiny piece of dust. I've thought all my life I'm someone really special, I'm this big guy, I'm this person, but I was just like, I'm nothing. I'm like this tiny piece of dust floating in the wind, here for 70 years, and then I'll expire and I'll be gone. Or maybe not. Maybe I'm nothing while being everything at the same time. There's this realization that if I've got my ego and I'm trying to make myself something, there's a saying of the Holy Prophet of Islam, may peace and blessings of God be upon him. He said that whatever raises itself in this earth, then Allah or God will reduce it, will remove it, will floor it. So I've been trying to raise myself all this time in parties and social environments, on the sports field, and God just kept on going, no. But then when I finally accepted my own tiny lifespan, my own tiny physical shape in this universe, then I suddenly made complete sense, and I suddenly felt absolutely part of every living thing. So it wasn't a rational experience. I can't really articulate it to you, and it may kind of sound a bit out there, but it was just this lesson of the heart, this complete deep conviction within here that this was it, and that I finally understood these things. So this was great. And then for about a month I was loving it, and I was like, great, I'm really spiritual, I love God, God loves me, I'm praying all the time. I had ups and downs. But then I woke up this one morning and I said to myself, it's absolutely irrational. You've got no rational basis for your belief. You're in a field. Yes, it was a hugely powerful experience, but there's no rational basis for your belief. So how do you know that what you're saying is in any way true? So it was terrifying. I was like, whoa, I found the meaning of life, but maybe I'm just conning myself and I'm just saying it because it's nice. So I came to the next step in my journey. So I ordered about 12 books from Amazon on science and God and spirituality and the universe and physics. And I decided to read. And there's actually a book over here called Our God, which I also read. And my starting position was that of Richard Dawkins. And I felt, Richard Dawkins, I read his book, God Delusion. He said, by the time I finish this book, I will be an atheist. I wasn't an atheist, so he didn't succeed. But he put forward very powerful arguments, which are very good arguments, which is, you can't deny evolution, because for me, evolution is a scientific fact. It may be slightly more beautiful than we expect it to be, but it happened. You can't deny the Big Bang happened. You can't deny the origin of life on this earth is a very, very beautiful and intricate thing. So creationism, the theory of kind of Adam and Eve being the first human beings, literally, as opposed to perhaps the first spiritual bringers of a spiritual message within our recent civilization 7,000 or so years ago. That sounded more in keeping. So I decided to investigate rationally. And my conclusion was that rather than science disproving God, or even science proving God, it kind of took me to a 50% mark, or maybe a 51% mark, to say that it was more probable than not that God did exist. But it didn't give me what I wanted. I was reading furiously thinking, right, God is going to be in these books somewhere. He's going to tell me, he's going to say, hello, Jonathan. But that never happened. But it did take me to a place where I could say, you know what, I'm free now. I'm no longer bonded by the chains of some sort of Western conception of science, which is actually quite ideological. It's based upon a materialistic premise that we are atoms and the atoms die. But maybe the atoms are much more than that. So I was liberated by science to return back to my journey and to use both my rationality and my heart. and also the concept of revelation. The concept that maybe consciousness is actually much more powerful than we think it is. Maybe the consciousness can actually tell us something if we look into it. So I decided to continue on this journey in the way that I had done. So at this point, I had reached a very strong sense of what it was for me to have spirituality. I believed in the existence of Allah, which is maybe an easier term for British people to come to, because the term of God has a lot of baggage from the church. I don't want to say that negative. I don't mean to say that negatively at all about the church, but for me it was a difficult concept, and my brother feels the same. I say God, and he's like, don't say God. And I say, well, what do you want to describe it as? And he says, say the universe, say the one, say the beautiful. And this is actually a verse from the Holy Quran as well, which I can't remember exactly, but it says that you can call him Ar-Rahman, which is the beautiful, or you can call him the gracious, and you can call him whatever you want. To him are the most beautiful names. So this helped me a lot. So I believed in God, and I haven't looked back since. And there are things I can't talk about now, but very strong sort of experiences of God, which gave me conviction that God existed, praying to him and answering prayers. And I think in reality, if anybody in the audience here is looking to investigate these things for themselves, definitely engage fully in the rationality element and read till you're completely satisfied. But you won't take books with you when you die, and you won't be able to squeeze all the books into your head. And at the end of that journey of rationality, you will reach a point within which questions remain unanswered, and you will need something else to give you, just my belief anyway, give you an understanding of what we are in relation to this massive, massive universe. So, but what I decided to do at this point was to say, well, what about religion? So, I've come to believe in God, but I still don't like religion. I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. I'm not very into, the church here, the mosques there, the temples there, the synagogues here, all very divided, all very fractured. I'd much rather just be God's man. I'd be me and Allah in the field. I can do my prayers, I can do meditation, a bit of poetry. I'm happy with that. But then I came to realise this was ungrateful, because the only reason I'd ever meditated was because of Buddha. The only reason I'd ever prayed was because of Jesus and Muhammad. And the only reason I'd ever fasted was perhaps because of Prophet David, or because of Buddha, or the different prophets. So I said, okay, if they've given me all of this good stuff, maybe there's more good stuff as well which I can find. So I decided to read the scriptures. So I started with the Holy Quran, just because it was quite exciting. It was a book which I hadn't come across, so I read the Holy Quran. Then I went from the Holy Quran to the Holy Bible, to the Holy Bhagavad Gita, which is the Hindu book, then the Dhammapada, which is the Buddhist book, and the Tao as well, by Lao Tzu, which is the way or the path. And I read these books. And I'm going to hurry up now. But I found this, I decided to read it, and when I did, then for my family's sake, because I knew they were going to think that I'd gone, as my brother says, off my rocker, I decided that I was going to show them that there was a sort of unity of spirituality which you can get from the different scriptures. So as I read, then I found that there were a whole sort of commonality of themes within all of the different spiritualities. So I decided to kind of try and list them. Attributes of God from the Bhagavad Gita, because that's the oldest book, arguably. Then the Torah, which is the Old Testament. The Dhammapada, which is the Buddhist Testament. The Gospel, which is obviously the books of Jesus, the Good News. And then the Holy Quran as well. And this was an amazing thing, because it meant that we could feel liberated in spirituality, rather than feeling like you have to look around and pick one and then hold fast to it and say, get away from me Christians, or get away from me Muslims, or get away from me Hindus. You could suddenly take ownership of all of the books and say, you know what, these are all mine, and I'm going to enjoy all of them. I'm going to read them, I'm going to practice them, I'm going to benefit from them, and I'm going to make one with things rather than to divide things. And that was a lesson which I thought Buddhism had taught me a lot about. So we don't maybe have time to go into that, but that was just what I felt. There was this complete unity. And then a lot of people say, well, why do you call yourself a Muslim then? If you have ownership of all of these spiritualities, why do you call yourself a Muslim? And the reason for that is it's a very simple one, it's chronological. If I was alive at the time of Jesus, then I would have been, does it go on and off? Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Then I would have been, I would have said, I am a follower of Jesus. If I was alive at the time of Moses, I would have said I'm a follower of Moses. If I was alive at the time of Buddha in the Indian subcontinent, I would have been a Buddhist. But it's just the reality of the way it works chronologically, historically. The books start maybe with the rishis in ancient India. They move forwards from that time period, maybe Zoroastrianism, and they go onwards like this. The Old Testament starts, Buddha comes along, Jesus comes along about 2,000 or so years ago, then about 1,500 years ago the Quran was revealed. So I looked at the books and I said, well, I want to accept all of them, and I will accept all of them, so I'm that thing. Then all my friends started saying, well, what are you? You know, are you a Christian, or are you a Buddhist, or are you this, or are you that? And I felt I was all of these things, but I felt that perhaps the best way of describing it was encapsulated within the Holy Quran. Not in an exclusive sense, and I know Andreas has a quote on this which he'll give us later, but it's a central tenet of Islam that if there's a board marker, is there a pen? Maybe not. Maybe not. Okay, but if there was a board marker, then you could do this. You could kind of say this is the beginning, and this is where it all started. And then another book came here, and then another book came here, and then another book came here, and another book came here, and another book came here, and another book came here. And the concept is that every single one of them is telling the same basic principles of love God and love your fellow neighbour, love humanity. And within Islam, there are many verses which basically say, believe in the oneness of Allah, and believe in every single one of His books, and then believe in every single one of His messengers. So for me, it was really simple. I'd say, great, I have them all, and that is a very simple thing for me to do. And it made complete sense with what I felt was right spiritually, and it made complete sense of what I'd read in terms of the spirituality, so they were in fact one. And this is what I did. There's a slight thing which I should add as well, which is that historically we can look at the scriptures and we know that there have been some alterations made. And so this was another problem for me, which was how can I find the real Jesus? Or how can I find the real Moses? How can I find the real Buddha? And Christians know this, and you know, a lot of my friends talking about this, there are problems because the scriptures aren't 100% accurate to what Jesus said. So for me it was, how can you find this? And I can leave it to Andreas to tell you why it is that the Quran is perhaps the best capturing of the teachings of Jesus, the teachings of Moses. Because essentially the Quran, when I read it, I was shocked, because it talks very little about Muhammad. It talks the majority of the talk, the focus is primarily on Moses, Jesus, and Abraham, as well as all of the Abrahamic prophets. And it also promises that there are prophets around the world that you don't yet know of. And it talks of prophets which have never been mentioned in books before, and history is only yet discovering them. So it makes claims, massive claims, that there are spiritualities which you don't know about, which I do, and they're out there and you've got to find them. And then it also promises that to every single people across the world, of every colour, of every nation, of every language, I've sent a messenger. So this, for me, was very much in keeping with what I thought was correct. So I accepted all of these, accepted all the prophets, and accepted Muhammad and accepted the Quran. Again, it was a very emotional thing, to be honest, because I prayed morning prayer about Muhammad, saying, should I accept Muhammad, the Holy Prophet of Allah? And the same thing happened in relation to God, where it was, yes, I had all the information I needed here, but then there was this uncontrollable sense of gratitude that whether or not I shouldn't accept him was the question, but the honour of being able to accept him was the greatest of all blessings. You know, who am I to ask that question, should I accept him? It was just an overwhelming gift that I was able to, is what I felt. So this brings us up to July 2011. And at this point, I was investigating Islam. I was going to a lot of mosques in my local area. I was praying. I was spending a lot of time with very good brothers. But I was beginning to see problems because there were issues within the mosques that I was visiting, and there were issues within the email threads that I was part of that made me feel as if the people I was talking to were seeking the same thing that I was, but that we hadn't yet reached it collectively. The Ummah, or the people of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, that the Ummah is in a time of, from what I sensed and what I do sense now, in a time of a huge yearning for the truth of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. They were at a time when they are in desperate need of reconnection with the Holy Quran and the truth of the Holy Quran, and with the true Son of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, and of the unity of the Ummah to be restored as well. so that no longer Sunnis fight Shias and kill each other, and so that no longer Alawites destroy 100,000 people within Syria, but that somehow the Ummah can be restored to the greatness, Ummah meaning the people of the nation of Islam, which is in fact meant to be the whole world. There's a prophecy that the whole world will bow in peace to God. And I felt this, this oneness is missing, and where is this oneness in the mosques? Where is this oneness within the people of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And how can I get to that oneness so I know that I not only have the scripture of Allah, the words of God in the Holy Quran, but I'm also surrounded by what is the equivalent of the companions of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that I felt that this was necessary to live Islam. I needed to be truly living the Sunnah. So I investigated further, and I felt that the conclusion I came to is that now is the time that the Holy Prophet ﷺ proclaimed, because he said that there was a time in the future when the words which he used were that he gave different prophecies, but one, for example, is that the mosques will be full, but their hearts will be empty. And all will be left of the Quran, of the Holy Quran, the Word of God, will be in script, just the words on the page. And he said that you will see my ummah, my people, bowing as if chickens pecking the floor rapidly. They will bow and they'll be up, and bow and they'll be up, and they'll be out of the prayer room in no time. And the more I was reflecting on Islam, and the more I was reflecting, I saw this greatness of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, this amazing light, which I felt so wanted to come to. But I was so saddened because I saw this tragedy of the ummah literally dying almost in front of my eyes around the world, in every country in the world, killing each other, destroying each other, not loving each other. So I felt that, okay, I feel personally now is the time that these prophecies will be fulfilled. Now is the time that the Holy Prophet ﷺ talked about when this tragedy would come to Islam. But he also gave great news, because he said that when this darkness comes to the earth, then he said that a man from among my ummah, and this is from Surah Al-Jumu'ah, and I don't have the verse now with us, but many people will know it, and many people are waiting for it. He said, the verse of the Holy Quran says that in the latter days, from among my ummah, there will be those who will join them later from among my ummah. And the companions of the Holy Prophet ﷺ said, Ya Rasulullah, O Messenger of Allah, what does this mean, sallallahu alaihi wasallam? What does this verse mean? And he ignored them, and he ignored them, and he ignored them. And then he eventually turned and he put his hand on the man on his right, who was one of his companions, a Persian man called Salman. And he said, in the future, then when Islam rises to the Pleiades, meaning to the stars, no, not Islam, when Iman, meaning faith, when Iman leaves this earth and goes to the Pleiades, then a man from among his people will take it back to the earth. So a man from among his people will take him on and bring him back to the earth. So the Holy Prophet ﷺ didn't say that Islam would leave. He said Islam will stay, the mosques will be full, people will be there, the Quran will be recited, and you'll have the spread of Islam, but the heart of Islam, the beauty of Islam, that spread so rapidly around the world, that would only come back when a man was raised from among the Ummah who would do this task in honour of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, as the Holy Prophet's servant. So I was looking for this man. And a while before, I'd come across a book within Islam, which is over here, which is the philosophy and the teachings of Islam. And it was by a man named Ahmed. And I felt that it captured the most beautiful understanding of Islam, which talked about a spiritual Islam. And it talked about an Islam which for me was directly in keeping with the glory of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. So I investigated about this person, and I asked God two questions. Is now the time that the Ummah will be rescued by you? Will you send somebody now? Is this now the time that the Ummah that the prophecies will be fulfilled? The prophecies that war will start in Damascus, for example, and prophecies that there will be a great shaking in the earth, and that there will be all of these terrible things happening to the Ummah. And so I prayed this, and I said, and if it is this time, then what should I, as a Muslim, what should I do? And I came across a hadith, which is a saying of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, which is that at the time of the latter days, at the time when my Ummah is shaking, then even if you need to cross mountains of ice, then you must do so in order to give your bayat, or to pledge your initiation, your allegiance to my Messiah when he comes. So the Holy Prophet ﷺ said that there will be a time when somebody will be sent and he will bring my ummah back to me, and that my ummah won't be lost and Allah won't leave his ummah to be gone, but that he will have mercy on them. And that this person will come, but he won't only be for the Muslims, but he'll be for the Buddhists, for the Christians, for the Jews, and for every people that are seeking God, seeking the truth of life. And so that was my question. I said, who is this man and who will he be when he comes? And so I had a dream. I did Ishtikhara prayer, which is a prayer which the Holy Prophet ﷺ told us to do. He said, whenever you need to make an important decision, then pray that if it is right for my deen, my religion, my life and the hereafter, ask God to guide you in a certain direction, and God to give you this thing, and to prove it to be right and to be blessed for you. And if it's wrong, take it away. So I prayed like this. I prayed for a long time, but the dream came on the first night. And this dream was, I had a phone, the phone I had before this, and I took the earphones from the phone and I put it into my ears. And then I heard this voice, an Arabic voice, which said the promised Messiah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I was very confused, because at that time I didn't know what sallallahu alaihi wasallam means. But it's a very special thing. It's a term which is reserved for the seal of the prophets, or the greatest of all the prophets, which is within Islam. The understanding is that Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, is the Khatam al-Nabiyyin, or the seal of the prophets, the greatest. It's not exclusive, it's not competitive, but it's just a term of beauty and honour. So I investigated, I didn't know what this meant. But then I looked back and I looked at the book I'd read, I looked at the man who, his name is Ahmed, and he said that I am that person. I am that person that has been sent to bring the Ummah back to the Holy Prophet of Islam, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I've been sent to fight a jihad, but not a violent jihad. So don't expect to see me take up the sword, but expect to see me take up the pen. And I will be Sultan al-Qalam, which is the prince of the pen. And I will fight a jihad of intellect and of rationality to bring the Ummah back to the true Sunnah of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And not only this, but I'll give unity in Khilafat. Because again, in the Holy Quran, then Allah promises to the Ummah, He said that I have made you Khalifas on the earth, I've made you successors on the earth, and I will make successors from among you. And so it's a promise which He gives to the Ummah. And He says that one day, then there will be Khilafat returning to the earth. And this is what the Ummah, the people of Muhammad, are desperately in need of, unity, so that they don't fight. Because if you're asking yourself, why on earth the Muslims kill each other? How can Sunnis kill Shias in Pakistan and Shias kill Sunnis in Iraq or in other places around the world? Then it's because of this lack of unity which the Holy Prophet ﷺ and 4 Khalifas after him provided, where they brought peace and they said, this is the Quran, this is the Sunnah, don't go astray, don't be violent, this is truth. So I found that there was also this same process of Khilafat, institution of Khilafat, which the Ummah, every Muslim will tell you they need Khilafat, they want Khilafat, but they'll also tell you that Khilafat can't be returned unless Allah returns Khilafat to the earth. And they've been trying for a long time, but it hasn't worked. But all the time, since the coming of this Messiah, there has been one Khalifa, or 5 Khalifas now, each being passed over, and they've survived, and they're with us today. So for me, from this dream, and for everything that I read, using my rationality, using my heart, then I felt convinced that this was the Islam which the Holy Prophet ﷺ told me to accept, and told me to follow. And I felt that, in my own humble opinion, that this was what every Muslim is in desperate need of, and that this is the unity which every human being, every British man like myself, looking for role models, looking for peace, looking for spirituality, you can kind of find it in the temples, but you can find it in its truest sense, for me, in the unity which Islam offers, which brings Buddha, Krishna, Jesus, Moses, Abraham, Adam, all under the greatness of God and of the Holy Prophet of Islam, with a piece of blessings probably on him. So that's where I went to, and this is Islam Ahmadiyyat. It's called Ahmadiyyat, but in reality it's just Islam. And that's, for me, was the truth, and that's how I came to Islam. So, thank you so much for listening to me. Apologies for taking so long. Yeah, I've never been able to tell that story succinctly. That was perhaps the longest now.
This question
for everyone.
Yes, okay. That's good. Okay, Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Andreas. Peace be upon you all. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of Allah, the most gracious and most merciful. I've been asked to come here today to tell you my story of how I became a Muslim. It's a very different story to what Jonathan just told you. I'll do my best to be as brief as possible and not miss out what you need to hear. So, I am of Greek Cypriot background, and I was raised as a Greek Orthodox Christian. I used to go to the church, how do you say, not very often, just on the major religious festivals. So I wasn't a very strict Christian. To be honest, most Christians today aren't very strict anyway. They don't, practice what they've been taught by Jesus or the Torah. So most Christians are very liberal, and I just followed suit. But I always believed in God. I actually remember this, it's a very strange story, but I hope you can understand. The first time I ever recognized that there was a God was when I was very young, and I was probably maybe 7 or 8 years old, and I just went into my conservatory, and it was a very cold and frosty day, and there was a mist on the window, and I just wiped the mist away, and I looked at my garden, and the flowers and the trees and everything was so beautiful, and something in my heart said, this is from God. There is God. I just realized, because life and nature was so beautiful. It's strange to relate to, I hope you can understand, but I always believed in God, just because of that moment, and it was always in my heart. But because I didn't go to church much, I never really read the Bible. I didn't have this kind of dogmatic Christian belief in the Trinity and the Son of God and all of this stuff. Like, it was just kind of liberal, I believe in God. Most people you actually meet today, they'll say, yeah, I'm agnostic, leaning towards believing that there's a force, there's a creator. So I guess you could put me amongst them. That's the attitude that I had. Being a Greek, I don't know if anyone else here is Greek, or if they want to admit it, if they can raise their hand. Is anyone here Greek? No? Okay, so I apologise to the Muslim audience of what I'm about to say now, because what the Greek attitude is towards Muslims, it's not a good one. Most Greeks have a lot of prejudice and hatred against Muslims, and this is deep-rooted through the history of Greeks and of Muslim nations. Always out of war. I guess it's been more exacerbated by the fact that in just the 70s, there was a war between Turkey and Cyprus, in which half of Cyprus was conquered, and there was a lot of destruction, and everyone knows what comes with war and all bad things. So a lot of hatred came with that war, which has been passed on from that generation to this generation, me. But for some strange reason, I didn't listen to it. I guess it's a good reason. I wasn't prejudiced to what my family had to say about the Turks. Most Greeks would actually say Turkish and Muslim are synonymous words. They mean the same thing to them. Even though they're completely different words, they don't mean anything. Like they're similar. They're two different things, but to a Greek, they're the same. Turks and Muslims are Turks, and they're the enemy. Okay, so, sorry, I mean, not all Greeks, but those kind of, old Greeks who remember the war, who like to always, say these kinds of things. I hope you can understand what I mean. But the youth of today are a lot more liberal, I guess, so they're not always like this. But there's still some deep-rooted hatred. I just wanted you to understand that my knowledge of Islam was like very little. If anything, it was just that Muslims just like to make war and stuff like that. So it was pathetic, my knowledge of Islam. But praise be to God Almighty, I ignored it, and in fact, during primary school and infant school, my very best friend was a Turk. He was a Muslim, and his name was Yusuf, and we were the very best of friends. So I guess maybe that's why I didn't really listen to what my parents had to say, just through his good nature. He was such a good person. But still, I didn't learn much Islam from him. I was just a kid, And then we went our merry ways. He went to a different secondary school from me, and we kind of drifted apart. Whilst I was at secondary school, there were a lot of Greek Cypriot boys who went there, so we just hang out, and I guess my knowledge of Islam just stagnated. It wasn't until I went to university that there was a new lease of life, an understanding of not just Islam, but everything. When I went to university, I met a lot of people, and it was like a cultural explosion. I'm pretty sure you guys have all been through this, that there's so many new ideas, new cultures, new faces, new people, new beliefs. Once you go to university, you just learn so much so quickly, and this little shell that you're in, this little protected shell, small tiny world that you were in before, just becomes a whole new massive world once you go to university. And you learn a lot very quickly, not just about the academics that you're doing there, but you learn a lot about life and everything like that. And funnily enough, the people that I was attracted to and I became very best friends with were Muslims. So there were 3 Muslims that I became very good friends with whilst I was at university, whilst I was studying. And I was very impressed with their conduct and everything that they had to say about life and relationships and family and their behaviour. I was so impressed. But there was one girl actually that I was most impressed by, my only friend. Her name's Mediha. She's now my wife. But I was so impressed with her behaviour that over time I just eventually just fell in love with her. She was the first girl I ever fell in love with. But at that time, when I first met her, we were just, studying together and we were good friends. Just being around my Muslim friends and being around her just made me want to be a better person because they were really good people. They were very kind and charitable, and they were nothing like what I'd heard about Muslims before. So it was wonderful. In fact, I had not just Muslim friends at university, not just those 3 Muslim friends. I had many friends, and I had the usual kind of friends that on a Wednesday night after sports, I used to play basketball, would go out and drink a lot, drink until you can't drink anymore. And there was just one night that I actually went partying with my brothers, and I drank a lot. I didn't behave very well. And I was just walking home and I said to myself, why do I do this? Like, why do people drink in this country? You just follow the crowd. So I just decided, I'm not going to drink alcohol anymore. And that was about 2 years before I became a Muslim. It's just something I decided to do. And I think that was maybe God guiding me. I'm very happy that God did that for me. It kind of made me disinterested in going clubbing and stuff like that, and I started to do more wholesome kinds of activities. It's very good for my soul. Anyway, the friendship with my Muslim friend, who was an MD Muslim, Mediha, it became very strong over time, and I eventually professed my love to her, and she told me flat out that it's not going to happen because she's a Muslim and she can only marry a Muslim. She's not going to date me or anything like that. She doesn't date. So I simply asked her, what is it to be a Muslim? So she told me a few things about Islam, and she said, well, if you're interested, you can find out more. You can go to my local mosque and you can talk to the imam there. So I started going to the local mosque. This is a very large mosque. It's called Bancroft for 2 Mosques. It's in Morden, South London. I met a lovely chap there called Bilal, and he was very interested in me. He didn't want to let me go. Every week he'd say, you have to come back the next week, we have to talk more. So we just used to talk a lot, about everything and anything. Mainly about Islam, obviously, but just used to talk a lot. He used to teach me a lot of things. And he gave me a Quran. So, as I did, I'll read the Quran. I'm a Christian, I've not even read the Bible properly, but I'm going to read the Quran. So I read the Quran from start to finish, and I couldn't put it down. It was so beautiful. I was so impressed with so much of it, and today I just want to tell you just a couple of verses that I was really impressed with. To see if I can find it. Sorry. Okay, so this is from the 2nd chapter of the Holy Quran. I won't read the Arabic. I can read Arabic, but it's not very good. It says, "Say ye, we believe in Allah and what has been revealed to us, and what was revealed to Abraham, and Ishmael, and Isaac, and Yaqub, and his children, and what was given to Musa and Isa, and what's been given to all other prophets from their Lord. We make no difference between any of them, and to him we submit ourselves." This was so powerful for me to hear as a Christian. It's this realization that all prophets came from the same source. And that when you see this division of all of these different Christian churches and different types of Jews and different types of Muslims, you just realize that there is just the one God, and He has His messages. And there's no difference or distinction between any of them, because they all gave the same message. They all wanted to bring everyone back to their Creator, to take us away from this materialism that we have in this world, and to make this spiritual link with this amazing force, this loving force that is God. So I was very impressed by this verse, and many more. And I was very impressed with the poetry of the Quran. One chapter in particular is chapter 55. And I just want to read a portion which seems to be lost. I'll see if I can find it. Okay, I'll just start from number 27. I found it. Yes. Thank you. So, all that is on the earth will pass away, and there will abide forever only the person of thy Lord, Master of glory and honour. Which then of the favours of your Lord will ye twain deny? And as you can see, there is this repetition, this poetic repetition. Which then of the favours will you deny? So, I was very impressed with this chapter as well as many others, so I fell in love with the Quran very quickly. Then I read a book called Life of Muhammad, Peace and Blessings of God Almighty be upon him, and I was very impressed with him. See, the thing is, all you hear about Muhammad as a Greek Cypriot growing up are negative things, sadly. There's a lot of bias out there, and they don't give the full facts of the story. So reading this just totally opened up my eyes to how wonderful this person was. He was so real to me, you know. Sometimes when you hear the stories of Jesus when you're growing up as a Christian, you just think, this is make-believe, it doesn't make sense, it doesn't sound real, it just sounds like someone just made this up. It's so unrealistic, you know. But then when you hear about the life of Muhammad, you can totally relate to what he was going through. And in the way that he behaved, you just think, I would never have done that. He's so amazing. For instance, there was one point in his life that I was so impressed with that I just broke down in tears of how wonderful a person he was. And that was when, finally, his message of Islam had become so great that he had thousands of followers. And he decided to go from Medina, to Mecca with these thousands of followers for pilgrimage. And Mecca, realizing that this great force was too superior to theirs and they would never be able to stop them, they gave in. For many years they were relentlessly trying to kill Muhammad and his followers, but his following became too great, so then they just gave up. And it was the way that Muhammad behaved at that point. So many years of suffering that he went through, to see so many of his companions killed, years of starvation, harassment, so much injuries were caused to him. You can't believe how much suffering he went through. And he just forgave them. You know, he had them in the palm of his hand, his people that they behaved in such a bad way. Such atrocious war crimes were committed against him and his people. And he just said that as, I believe it's as Joseph, the prophet Joseph forgave his brothers, I'll forgive you. And that was that. Just hearing him put it that way, I was very impressed. I had to accept him. So, my previous prejudices were completely wrong. So I decided to become a follower of Muhammad, a Muslim. So, as I was going to this mosque, which was an empty mosque, I wasn't taught just about the Holy Prophet Muhammad, I was taught about who they believe is another prophet who came after Muhammad. His name is Mirza Ghulam Ahmed, and we believe him to be the promised Messiah, and the Mahdi, the guided one. And he wrote many books about many different things. And one of them was actually about Jesus and his crucifixion. He spoke about how Jesus survived the crucifixion. He didn't actually die. And just hearing that, as a Christian, you just think, wow. Because before you were like, why would God have a son and kill him in such a nasty way on the cross? It's just so mean, I don't like it. You think, God saved his beloved from the crucifixion. He saved him. And he allowed him to continue preaching his message to the lost tribes of Israel in the East. So he spoke about these things and many other things. And I had to accept him. Everything seemed to click in my head. It just made sense to me. So, yes, I became an Ahmadi Muslim. So I converted to Islam, and the following year I married my wife, Khadija. That was about 5-6 years ago now. And I started to change a lot. In a good way. Inside, I felt like it was a very good thing. But all of my friends from back home, they thought it was sort of bad. They used to like to go to the pub a lot. They used to go and play snooker until 4 or 5 in the morning. They used to go clubbing. They used to womanize and speak about women in a very bad way. They used to do many things. And I didn't like spending time with them anymore because of the way they behaved. It was not one with what I wanted to be. I wanted to be like Muhammad. I didn't want to be like the opposite of this wonderful man that I wanted to become like, which is how they were behaving. So I started to drift away from them. And they, it was difficult, basically. So just say that if anyone's had a very hard time when they converted to Islam, and the kind of negativity you get from your old friends that sometimes they're not as accepting or as liberal as you might want them to be. I can understand that. It's quite painful. Because you grow up with them and you were kids together. You went through everything together. And then suddenly you just decide, okay, I'm going to become a follower of Muhammad. And they don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. It's very hard to take. But that's okay. It's okay. This decision I made was not for them, to make them happy. It was to please God. So I did that. What I also noticed when I became a Muslim is that a lot of the bad things I used to do in the past, I'm not going to list them. May God hide my sins from you, please. But I started to shed them away. They all started leaving me. These things I used to do that were very bad in my eyes, suddenly I had the strength to not do them anymore. It's funny, even before Islam, you do certain things, and you just know in your heart it's wrong. It's weird that you have this innate sense of what is right and wrong, and you don't even need, forgive me, don't take this out of context, but you don't need the Holy Quran to tell you. Sometimes you just know what's right and wrong. Okay, the Holy Quran's amazing because it sets it clear what is right and wrong. But I think this is to do with the soul, and when you wronged your soul, basically. And for some reason I couldn't in the past conquer these bad things that I was doing, but it was through Islam. It was through prayer. It was through fasting that you can achieve these things, because you have this amazing structure to your life, and you have God in your life, and you start to realize that God is with you everywhere. Before, I believed in God Almighty, but in Islam, you have the 5 daily prayers, and you're constantly reminded that there's this all-seeing, beautiful force that's always watching you. And you start to realize, wait a minute, I'm about to do something wrong, and I know that He's watching. So you just can't do it. Because God becomes real, okay, not that He was fake to me before, but He becomes so real. It's like He's there, He's right there all the time, but in a good way, that you feel strong, you feel courage, you feel happy, but then you're scared, and you don't want to make Him upset with you. And sometimes you do wrong, and then you pray for forgiveness, and it's really good. It's really good to know that He's there to listen. And I hope that He'll accept my apologies. You start to shed your sins when you become a Muslim, definitely. If you do it right, if you try it, if you don't just become a Muslim by name, if you actually say, well, a Muslim is a follower of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, so I should follow him. If you truly do that, then definitely you should improve. Because he was honestly the best person I've ever read about, the best person I truly believe ever lived and ever will live. So, yeah, I improve. But, don't get me wrong. I'm not a great guy. I still do things wrong and stuff, but I could see that there were improvements, so I was very happy with that change. Although my old friends and sadly my family found that very hard to take, that I became a Muslim. I actually remember when I told my mom that I'd become a Muslim, and tears came into her eyes. And she was so, it was as if she lost her son, as if I died or something. And she said, what's wrong with our religion? I just couldn't say anything to her at the time, because I realized that there were many things wrong with their religion. If we take the word religion to mean lifestyle, the way that you live, the way that you live your life and act, then there were many things wrong with the way that I was living before, the way that I was taught to be by my dad, you know? Which I'm not going to say what he taught me to do. So there's that. So then, a few years later, a Muslim friend of mine from the Muslim community, he said to me, well, you've read a lot of books. Because when I became a Muslim, I decided to read a lot of books about Islam, about philosophy, about everything that I could. I just became really interested. And he thought that, you know, I had some knowledge, so maybe I should come preaching Islam with him. So he invited me to come and preach Islam. So we set up a little bookstall in the middle of the high street, got some books out, and we started speaking to members of the public about Islam, and I did my best. And I was listening to a conversation that someone was having with another friend of mine, a Muslim friend of mine. And this person was kind of antagonizing my Muslim friend. And this person said to my Muslim friend, do you even pray 5 times a day? And he said, yes. And I said, thank God that this person didn't answer me that question, because I was only praying my prayers maybe 2 or 3 times a day. So then I realized I have to say my prayers 5 times a day, otherwise I get very embarrassed. I think that was God showing me that you have to hold fast to your 5 daily prayers. He did it in an indirect way. So that day onwards, I decided, okay, for my own sake, if I'm going to preach Islam, I have to practice what I preach. It's a very popular saying. So I started saying my 5 daily prayers, and it was amazing, you know. Waking up every day at dawn, just before the birds start singing. And when you hear the birds singing, as if they're praising God with you. So ever since then, I've never turned back on that, you know. God forgive me, sometimes I miss a prayer here and there because I was sleeping or whatever. But I try my very best to say them. I'm very happy, very close to my Creator. It's through these 5 daily prayers that you feel very close to God Almighty. And that's what Islam does. It's like God's your friend. And to have a friendship with Him, you have to work at it. You have to talk to Him all the time. And if you forget Him, He'll forget you, definitely, and you'll just start doing the wrong things. So I've noticed that you know, sometimes when you just stop saying your prayers for a couple of days, this is in the past, you start to do really bad things. You're like, what the hell? Like, seriously. Islam is just amazing. It keeps you on the straight and narrow in such a good way. And it's this practice of not just saying your prayers, but to read the Quran. This constant reminder in the Quran, just go feed the poor, you know? It tells you this all the time. So like, I went from someone who never gave anything to charity, I was rubbish. Now I give so much more to charity. I've got a long way to go, honestly. But I became so much more charitable just because of this constant reminder, this wonderful reminder that the Quran is. So, yeah, I started to discuss Islam with a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different faiths. And my beliefs started to get challenged a lot. You know, I met up with a Christian brother, and we had some really intense discussions, you know, until like 2, 3 in the morning. So, you know, he finally made me go back and realise I couldn't just read a few verses of the Bible here and there. So I went and read the Bible again. Well, from start to finish. The Gospel, that is. And met some Sunni Muslims, so I had to listen to what they had to say. It really challenged what I believe, you know, really shook the foundations of what I took to be truth. But it's these conversations, going back, learning, reading, praying, reflecting, that really made my faith so strong. And that's the amazing thing about Islam, is that you're told to invite people to God in the best of ways. You're told it's actually the duty of Muslims to try and help someone who doesn't believe in God Almighty, to install that belief that there is a Creator. You should love that Creator. He loves you, in there. So it's just really strengthened my faith talking with others and increased my knowledge, and I hope that God will always increase my faith and knowledge. I hope that always improves as a person. So please pray for me for that. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to what I have to say to this humble person. And I hope that it's been of some help. I hope I can be of some help to you if you have any questions. So thank you very much for your time.
Cool. Again, thank you everyone for coming. I'd like to open up to the floor for any questions anyone has for Tony or Andreas. Please don't be shy.
Sorry guys, I've only got like 10 minutes and I really have to dash. So.
You should tell them why.
Yes, my wife recently, by the grace of God Almighty, gave birth to our first daughter. So I want to spend time with her. So that's what.
السلام عليكم. ما شاء الله we can relate together from you, inshallah, all this give us some hope to the non-Muslims to become Muslim also, because end of the day, if you see 20 or 30 years all of us, we were nothing in it, and after a while all of us we're going to be nothing again. As the Prophet ﷺ, peace would be open to himself, the average age of my nation is between 60 and 70. As according to that, so we are in very short period. How do you suggest as inside you are Muslim, and how do you suggest a non-Muslim to be one hand in the future? If you can. Jazakallah.
Okay, so do you want to answer? It's a very difficult question. I think that is this universality of Islam. See, most people, they have an inclination, even if they don't realize it. If you speak to someone from England, even if they claim to be somewhat of an agnostic or an atheist, there'll be somewhere in their heart they'll have some kind of understanding of, say, Jesus and what he has to say. So it's through this mutual love that Muslims have of all prophets of God Almighty. That's one way, definitely. You can approach them and say, I love Jesus. That will really shock them. Most people don't know that Muslims love Jesus so much. So that's one way I definitely could say. And I guess it's also you have to really understand where they're coming from. It's very difficult, but most people today, they're saying, I don't believe in God, I believe in science. So if you show them how beautiful the Quran is, the wonderful, scientific things in the Quran. Not that the Quran is a book of science, but it has some science in it. These amazing truths about the Big Bang and so forth, that could bring them up. I don't know. But you have to be very loving. I think that's the most important thing. I find that some Muslims can be quite harsh, because some people are so astray from Islam that you just think, oh, goodness me, I don't want to have anything to do with that person. But I think that if we realize that we have to try and emulate the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we have to try and emulate the attributes of God Almighty, and the most prominent of those attributes I've been told, is God's merciful nature. We always have to be merciful to everyone. Always have to be forgiving and kind. And if we're always forgiving and kind, I'm sure that will attract people to us. Definitely. It's this forgiveness and kindness that I think will be the key.
So it was particularly how can we help British people to come to Islam? Is that the part of the question? Yeah. I think a common response that I get from my friends and family members when I say that I am Muslim, then they say, "Oh, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious." Is that common. Do people often come across this? So there's a sense of we're spiritual people, but we're not necessarily religious people. And I can fully understand it because there's been very sad things that have happened in Britain in light of recent times. We all know about abuse, child abuse particularly, and this has affected a lot of people. So they've put two together. They've said these problems come with religion, so I reject religion, but they want spirituality. And I think this is true for British people. They're very spiritual people, but they don't know how to express that spirituality. They have this yearning inside where they're going home on the tube and it's packed and it's hot, or when they get out at night and they see the stars and they say, I don't want to go to church, but I do feel like there's something more to my life, and that when I pass away from this life, there is something other than just this. Maybe I won't just expire like that. Maybe there is something beyond this. So I think that the key to this is to recognize that even though Islam is a religion which brings people together and enables people to relate, enables me to love you, you to love me, it's much more than that. It's the core of it is enabling me to love this amazing reality, and for that reality to relate to me, and about establishing that connection. And this is why the Quran talks about belief and good deeds. And I spent a lot of my life trying to do good deeds, but without any belief, then I was always in this great struggle. So I think that the key for British people, and God willing, all of our brothers and sisters in Britain can come to have spirituality in their lives, is to look within and to ask themselves those questions. Don't be scared of why questions. Don't just try and answer the what questions. What is this? What is the moon? What is the sun? But the legitimate question is a why question. Why do I exist? What is the purpose of this universe? They're really deep and very exciting questions. And I think there's innate answers within us which can be gathered. But I think in addition to that, really, it's Islam or about any spirituality, because you'll know the Islamic concept of spirituality is there's only really one God, one creation, one spirituality, it's all one. It's just that relationship, just talking to God. And the concept of God within Islam is that He lives, so He never died. God bless Jesus, peace be upon Him. He didn't die on the cross. God is infinite, and God is all-powerful, almighty, gracious, merciful. And then you just simply need to put a hand towards Him, and He'll put an arm towards you, walk towards Him, He'll run towards you. And this is the most beautiful thing that I found, is just this raw spirituality, which is the relationship between the soul and the universe, or creation and the creator. I think that's what appeals to British people. More than the religious element, but the religious element's amazing, but we just need to have the spirituality, and then the religion can come later, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just one question. What's the best advice both of you can give to someone who wants to tell their family without destroying the relationship, with your mom and dad?
That you're Muslim. So your parents don't know you're Muslim, but you want to tell them.
I'll go first and you go after me. I'm probably not the very best person to talk to about this. I'm very sorry. But when I told my parents it was a train crash, it was probably one of the worst, hardest days of my life. And if I could go back, there's nothing I could have said differently. It just is as it is. How they react is totally up to them. So I don't know what to say other than just you have to be honest with yourself. You have to pray to God Almighty that He'll make your parents understanding. But sadly, in my case, they weren't. But that's just life. You have to love God more than your parents. It's very difficult, but you have to. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen. I'm hoping they can be really accepting and embrace your new faith. But what I can say is that, from my perspective, you have to be prepared for the worst. And I got through it. Because I held on to my faith. And if I didn't have God in my life, then I I don't know if I could have survived that. It was very difficult. So, as again, I pray that doesn't happen to you. I don't have any real advice or guidance. So I'll pass it on to Johnny. Hopefully he can say something better than what I have to say.
Yeah, so Simon, I think that firstly it's just an amazing and wonderful thing which you should feel very proud of, internally anyway, individually. You know, there's many sayings of the Holy Prophet of Islam about how God, about the response of God when somebody turns to Him. Because there's this concept within Islam which is tawbah, which is repentance. But really what it translates as is turning towards something. So this is your priority in life is, you know, you need to some extent have your priorities and work out what you're going to put first. And this is there's a message that was given all the time in the Old Testament and then again in the Quran, which is, what will you believe? Will you believe the truth or will you believe that which your forefathers have given you? And we all have a choice about whether we accept just the culture around us, or whether are we brave enough to accept something which we think is right, but which other people might not agree with. So I think the first thing is just, you know, congratulations on this amazing thing you've been able to have the opportunity to come to Islam. So that's the first thing. But then the second thing is, you know, parents are funny because they lead, but they also follow. So I know Muslim brothers that when they came to Islam, then, you know, their fathers said, "What on earth are you doing? You know, be spiritual but not religious. You know, you don't need religion. You can just have yourself and God." But then 2 years later, you find that that father's actually preaching to other members of the family about Islam, and they've done a complete 180. And they now think that Islam is perhaps, you know, the best expression of spirituality. So patience is required, and there may be some arguments initially, but it is, eventually nothing is within our hands, you know, no matter what we say, how we say it. It's like Brother Andreas said, it doesn't really matter what we say to our parents, but what matters is what's in our hearts and what we say to God on the evening that we before we go to bed, those prayers that we say. Because it's not our tongues or our actions which really turn hearts, it's just God's mercy, God's grace. So if a person can remain true to their Islam, then then God will honour that, and God will adore that, and God will turn the hearts of whoever is valuable in that person's life. And this is the stories of many of the most amazing companions of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, who came from complete opposition to complete submission within, you know, minutes, like the story of Umar, who went into the house of his sister in order to beat her because he found out that she was turning Muslim. But then when he heard the recitation of the Holy Quran, then he found such beauty in it that he was immediately brought to Islam. So this is the beautiful thing about Islam, is it's more than just this, it's also your heart. So I think, you know, you don't need to worry, and inshallah your parents can become Muslim too, inshallah.
I'll let Andreas get back to his family.
Okay. Thank you again.
Anyone have any questions?
I have just a quick one for Andreas.
Andreas, before you run away?
Just a quick one.
Yeah.
You spoke about your experience, your parents' reaction when you first converted. Has there been any change in how they've sort of expressed to you, like your positive changes in life? Have they expressed anything to you? Has their attitude changed?
Or friends even, not just parents, but your friends as well.
Friends, yes. Parents, no. What happened was, a huge divide was caused when I told them that I'd become a Muslim. So they really didn't want to have much to do with me anymore. So the changes that happened in my life, they weren't witnessing them. So they don't know. So, yeah. Also, some friends of mine who were very prejudiced against Muslims, and very prejudiced about some of my behaviours. For instance, those friends that used to like to go clubbing and go to snooker halls and stuff like that. And I used to say to them, no, I'm a Muslim now, I can't hang out till 4 in the morning. You know, with you guys, you're going to be drinking, I won't drink. You guys are going to be talking about girls in a really lewd way. I don't want to be there. You know, they just get insulted and they just disown you like you're trash, you know. Even when most rational people would say, well, you know, he's trying to be a good guy. But it doesn't work like that, you know. But then there were many other friends that I had in the past and I made at university that did bother them that I became Muslim. And in fact, some of them actually took me to one side and said to me, you've really changed. You know, you really are a different person now. So yeah, that was in a good way. Not that I became so great, but just they noticed these small changes and they liked it. So yeah, that's the best answer I can give. I really have to.
Anyone have any other questions?
Maybe it's not a question, but I just I'm not sure about what he said. Just I want to say a bit sort of more. Ask a question about my sister said. Just to give her some courage. I have a friend of mine, subhanAllah, almost her family. She was his wife at the beginning. He wasn't even a Muslim, but when he subhanAllah became Muslim, she became Muslim, and her dad was totally like mad when he heard about this. And subhanAllah, end of the day, almost all the family became Muslim. And also we need to look at it another way, which is, unfortunately, we need to look at this life with an open mind. Because I will be alone one day in my grave. This is the fact. So I need to look at it like with such a way. It's not my father going to be with me, or my mother, or all the family going to be with me. And in the same time, we need to use wisdom, because unfortunately the media which shows in the TV and about the Muslim, which is not the truth. So they look at it, the Islam and the Muslim something else. But obviously when someone be a Muslim, he needs to follow like Islam, and when he will show his family like the character of the Muslim, they will accept it step by step, obviously, inshallah. And obviously we need to trust Allah, and we pray for Allah to make our family to accept this thing. Forgive me about my English, I'm Arab man, I just came to England, so maybe.
Understood your preference.
Yeah.
Do you have a question at the front? Oh, no, sorry. Oh, sorry. Do you have any more questions from anyone?
I have one question. It's just a question.
I have one for Andreas, but he's gone.
Oh, sorry about that.
So a quick one. Often there's a stereotype about Islam is a very closed community. Andreas mentioned that about how the Muslims and Turks are seen as one. What's been your experience coming almost as an outsider, almost coming to Islam? Is the stereotype true, partly true, or not?
So I guess the question is it a closed sort of community? Well, so initially I didn't come to God at all for the community. I remember going to mosques and being surrounded by people and feeling different from them. You know, sadly there aren't enough yet. You know, my British brothers, you know, haven't yet come to Islam like they will, inshallah, in the future. So, you know, I'd look around and I would see converts. I'd see, you know, African brothers, Indonesian brothers, some British brothers as well. So I initially would feel quite challenged by it, to be honest. But then this was a very good thing, because it's the central concept within Islam is of the oneness of God. So there's a surah which says, "Qul huwallahu ahad," which is say that He is Allah the One. And that's the central principle of Islam, is that there is only one God. And if you come to Islam, then do it for no other reason but for that one reason. And then for everything else will fall into place. And this is the beautiful thing that I found, is that the more I focused on God, then the more I found love in the mosque. And the more that I prayed, then the more that after my prayer I wanted to, you know, to be close to the brothers that were next to me, and that I found that they were the most loving guys. that I met, and there's a, I don't want to misquote it, but in the Holy Quran, then God says to humanity that even with all of the wealth in the world, you could never have created brotherhood like this, and that it's only through the love of God that you can have brotherhood. And this is something which I definitely felt. You know, I was always asking myself, how can I be really loving towards other people? And how can I experience real love from them as well? And the central claim within Islam, which is to be tested, is that you'll never experience real love until you've loved God. You can't love this way until you've experienced love this way. Because if you try and love this way first, then you'll be ever in need. And if something, let's say I love this brother over here, you know, or Abdul Noor, then you know, if I let Abdul Noor down, then if he's dependent on me for his love, then suddenly our relationship breaks down, and he can no longer be a brother to me. But by the grace of God, and inshallah, you know, say Abdul Noor is completed by the love that he has from Allah, then he is absolutely full with that. Then he loves me no matter what. It doesn't matter what I give to Abdul Noor, because he's just giving it to me. Straight, love, love, love. And similarly, if I'm completed by Allah, then I love him for him. I love him for God's sake. And I think this is something which is missing from our society, is that we love conditionally rather than unconditionally. You know, we love because we want something back in return, but can we really love selflessly, purely for the sake of God? That's a real challenge. But that's the beauty of the Holy Prophet, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, is that he had this unbelievable love, this overwhelming love, because he was so complete. Then he just loved, and just, you know, the whole world fell in love because of that love. So yeah, it's very powerful, yeah.
Any more questions? Okay, thank you all for coming. Before you head off, I'd like to mention that we have a table for literature here. Just after Johnny mentioned, for example, the book Al-God, The Philosophy of Leading Islam, and something that Andreas also mentioned, for example, Jews in India. You are more than welcome to take anything you like. And secondly, we have another table on the side there with some sheets, which you can write your name and email address down. If you'd like to see more events like this, all you use an email address. I'm a medic, I don't have time to spam you guys, so don't worry. And we have an event in December as well, so if you'd like to know, please write your email address down. Thank you.